It's late and you can't sleep, and at some point your thumb finds your phone in the dark and you type a question into the search bar that a huge number of people type when nobody's watching. How much does the average American have in savings? You hit enter, and a number comes back glowing on the screen, $62,410. $62,000. And whatever you're feeling right now, it's probably one of two things. Maybe your stomach drops because you're looking at your own account with its $400, or it's zero and you're thinking, everyone else has 60 grand in the bank and I am so far behind I will never catch up. Or maybe you squint at it and think, that can't be right. I don't know a single person with $60,000 just sitting and checking. Who are these people? Here's the thing, and it's the reason for this entire video. You're right to doubt it. That number is a lie. Not a made-up fake news lie. It's a real, official number, straight from the Federal Reserve. It's a lie in a much sneakier way. It is a true number that describes almost nobody, hiding behind one of the most deceptive words in the English language, average. And once you see how that one word bends the truth, you're going to understand what Americans actually have in the bank. The real, honest, kind of brutal number. And it is nothing like $62,000. So let me show you how the lie works, with a picture. And then I'm going to show you the real numbers, how much the typical person genuinely has, where you personally fall in the pile, exactly how rough it gets when you look at whether people can survive a single surprise bill, and the strange, almost hopeful thing hiding inside all of it. Because by the end, I don't think you're going to feel behind. I think you're going to realize that almost everyone is standing on the edge of the same cliff, pretending they're not, and that it takes shockingly little to end up genuinely ahead of nearly the entire country. Let's start with the giant. Imagine we take 100 everyday Americans and stand them in a long line across a football field, and we sort them not by height but by how much money is in their bank accounts. Least on the left, most on the right. Now walk to the exact middle of that line, to person number 50, and look at what they've got. That person in the dead center, the truly typical American, the one with just as many people richer as poorer, has about $8,000 in the bank, not $62,000. 8. So where did the $62,000 come from? Walk all the way to the right end of the line, past person 90, past 99, to the very last person. And this person isn't really a person anymore. They've grown into a giant, a figure a mile tall, head scraping the clouds because their bank balance isn't measured in thousands. It's measured in millions or hundreds of millions. Now, to get the average, you take everybody's money, dump it into one enormous pile, and split it evenly across all 100 people. But that giant at the end dumped a mountain into the pile all by themselves. So when you divide it up, everyone's imaginary share balloons, and the average shoots up to 62,000, floating in the air somewhere around the giant's knees, far above the heads of every single real person standing in that line. That is the lie of the average. It isn't counting what people have. It's taking a few enormous fortunes and smearing them across everyone else on paper until a typical person appears 8 times richer than they actually are. Picture that average number as a shiny balloon tied to the giant's belt, hovering way up in the sky while 90-something normal-sized people stand on the ground far below it, none of them anywhere near it. There's an old line that gets this exactly right. Never try to wade across a river just because you heard it's 4 feet deep on average. Because 4 feet on average can mean it's 1 foot deep for most of the way, and 30 feet deep in the middle, and the average will drown you. The average American savings number is that river. It looks shallow and safe and even a little impressive. And it will drown you if you use it to figure out where you really stand. Because you are not the giant, and neither is anyone you know. You're one of the normal-sized people on the ground. And the number that actually describes you and almost everyone around you isn't the average. It's that person in the middle of the line. It's $8,000. That number even has a name, the median. And from here on, it's the only one we're going to trust. Now let's be honest about that $8,000, because it's rougher than it first looks, in 2 different ways. That $8,000 figure is what the Federal Reserve calls transaction accounts. Picture the money you could actually get your hands on this week: your checking account, your savings account, a money market account, the balance on a prepaid card, the everyday money. What it does not include is just as important. It is not your retirement account, not your 401k, not your investments, not the equity locked up in your house. So when we say the typical American has $8,000 in the bank, we mean exactly that, in the bank, reachable, spendable. The stuff that's supposed to catch you when you fall. Second, and this is the part that should really land, that number has barely moved in a generation. Picture a line chart on the wall tracking that middle person's bank balance across the years. Back around 2010, it sat at about $4,800. By 2019, it had crept up to around $6,100. Today, it's around $8,000. So over more than a decade, through a long stretch where the economy grew, the stock market soared, and paychecks got bigger on paper, the typical American's actual cash cushion crawled from under $5,000 to $8,000. Picture that line as an almost flat road stretching across 10 years, rising just a little, while right beside it, the cost of rent and groceries and everything else climbs a steep hill into the sky. The cushion inched up. The cost of living sprinted. That's why $8,000, which sounds like a decent little safety net, doesn't feel like one to the people who have it. It's a number that's been standing almost still while the ground underneath it kept getting more expensive. So that's the middle of the whole line, but you probably want to know where you personally stand. And for that, we have to break the line into smaller groups, because a 25-year-old and a 60-year-old are not playing the same game. Picture a staircase, each step a decade of life. On the youngest step, Americans under 35. The balances are thin. Many are just starting out, carrying student loans, earning entry-level money, and the average there sits around $20,000, with a typical middle person well below that. Then something strange happens as you climb the middle steps, the 35 to 55 stretch, the years when incomes are supposedly at their peak. You'd expect the balances to climb steeply. They don't. For the typical household, the cash cushion barely moves through all those years, because those are exactly the years the money is getting devoured. The mortgage, the kids, the car, the aging parents, the daycare that costs as much as rent. Picture a person on those middle steps earning more than they ever have and standing there with both arms full of bills, unable to set anything extra aside. It's only near the top of the staircase, around retirement age, that balances rise to their highest. The average for people in their late 60s and early 70s climbs toward $100,000, decades of saving finally stacking up. And then there's the split that matters even more than age, and it's a cliff, not a staircase. Picture the lines sorted by income instead. Down at the bottom, among the lowest earners, the typical bank balance is about $900. 900, the kind of number a single dental bill erases in an afternoon. Now picture the highest earners. The top slice, their typical balance is over $111,000. Same country, same banks, same week. And one group has more than 100 times what the other has sitting in the account. When people talk about inequality, this is what it looks like inside a checking account. Not a gentle slope, but a sheer wall, with one group standing on a real cushion and another standing on almost nothing at all. But here's where the picture goes from thin to genuinely alarming, because a bank balance is just a number until life sends a bill. So let's ask the real question, not how much people have, but whether they could survive. One bad day, and this is where the numbers get rough. Picture the single most ordinary financial emergency there is. A car that won't start, a broken tooth, a sudden trip to the ER. Call it $1,000. Now picture a room of 100 Americans, and we ask them one question. Could you pay that $1,000 surprise right now, out of savings, without borrowing? According to Bankrate's most recent report, around 6 in 10 of them would have to say no. No, they could not cover a single $1,000 bill without reaching for a credit card, a loan, or family. Picture 60 of those 100 people raising their hands to admit they'd have to go into debt over a car repair. That is not a fringe. That is the majority of the country. And it gets sharper. Picture the people who have nothing set aside for emergencies at all. Not a small fund, not a thin one, but zero. That group is now more than 1 in 4 Americans, around 27%, and that is the highest share ever recorded. Picture a quarter of that room standing there with completely empty hands. And picture this. About a third of Americans owe more on their credit cards than they have saved anywhere, meaning their emergency fund isn't just empty, it's underwater. A card with a balance, standing in for the safety net that isn't there. Even the smaller shocks catch people. The Federal Reserve found that only about 63% of adults could cover a $400 emergency with cash or its equivalent, which means more than a third of the country couldn't comfortably absorb a $400 hit without it turning into a problem. And when you ask about the cushion the experts actually recommend, 3 months of expenses set aside, only around 46% of people have it, even as the vast majority say they'd feel deeply uncomfortable without it. Picture most of the room knowing they should have a life raft, and fewer than half of them actually sitting in one. This is the real state of the American bank account, not the $62,000 fantasy. A country where the typical person has about $8,000, where a majority can't take a $1,000 punch without borrowing, and where more than a quarter have nothing set aside at all. Now, before this turns into a lecture about how nobody has any self-control, let me stop and be fair, because that story is both wrong and cruel. The reason so many bank accounts are this thin is not that Americans are uniquely foolish or lazy, it's that the deck genuinely got harder to beat, and you can see that in the numbers too. Picture a paycheck landing in an account, and then watch where it goes. Rent or a mortgage payment takes a huge bite, and that bite has grown enormously. Housing costs have climbed far faster than paychecks for years. Groceries take more than they used to. Then the car payment, the insurance, the phone, the childcare, the minimum payments on old debt. Picture the paycheck as a bucket of water poured in at the top, and a whole row of pipes draining it out the sides. Rent, food, car, debt, until what reaches the bottom, the part you could actually save, is a thin trickle. For a lot of households, there is simply nothing left at the end to put anywhere, no matter how disciplined they are. You can see this squeeze in one national number. The personal saving rate, the share of income Americans actually manage to keep, has dropped to around 3% in recent months. 3 cents saved out of every dollar of take-home pay when the long-run historical average was closer to 8 or 9. Picture that shrinking from a decent slice of a pie down to a sliver you can barely see. And on the other side of the ledger, debt has exploded. Total household debt in America has pushed past $18 trillion. Picture a mountain of borrowed money growing taller every year, right next to that flat little savings cushion that never seems to grow at all. So when you see that the typical person has $8,000 and most can't cover a surprise, understand what you're really looking at. It's not a country full of people making dumb choices. It's a country where the cost of a normal life has been climbing faster than the income to pay for it, where saving anything at all has gotten genuinely hard, and where the easiest release valve, reaching for credit, is always right there, glowing at every checkout. The thin bank account is not a character flaw. For most people, it's the math they were handed. But here's the strange, almost liberating thing hiding inside all of these rough numbers. And it's the real reason I wanted to make this video. Go back to that search bar and the $62,000 number that made you feel so far behind. You now know it was a giant's shadow, a figure that describes almost no real person alive. Which means the race you thought you were losing was never real. You were comparing your actual bank account against a number that a handful of billionaires inflated into a fantasy, and then feeling like a failure for not matching a mirage. Picture letting that balloon go and watching it float up and away into the clouds. You were never behind everyone, you were measuring yourself against a ghost. And when you swap the ghost for the truth, something flips. The truth is that the typical person has about $8,000, that most people can't survive a $1,000 surprise, that a quarter of the country has nothing saved at all. Picture that street of ordinary houses again, the neighbors with the nice cars and the confident smiles and the vacation photos. Behind a huge number of those doors is a bank account with a few $100s in it and a stack of credit card debt, and a person lying awake doing the exact same late-night math you do. The confidence is a front. Almost everyone is standing much closer to the edge than they will ever let on. And that means the bar to actually being ahead is astonishingly low. Think about it. If most of the country can't cover a $1,000 emergency, then the simple act of having $1,000 set aside, just $1,000, lifts you above more than half of America. If you can get to 3 months of expenses saved, a boring, unglamorous emergency fund, you are standing on higher ground than most of the people whose lives look far more impressive than yours. Picture the whole crowd standing in water up to their necks, treading, straining to keep their chins above the surface. And picture yourself, having built a small cushion standing on a single step just high enough to keep your head clear and dry. You don't have to become the giant. You don't have to hit 62,000 or a million. In a country this financially fragile, a small, steady, deliberate buffer doesn't just help you. It makes you the rare exception. The rough numbers aren't only bad news, they are the lowest bar you will ever be asked to clear. Let me show you what that low bar looks like in 2 real lives, because the difference between clearing it and not is smaller than you'd ever guess, and it decides everything. Picture 2 neighbors on the same street, same job, same paycheck, same model of car in the driveway, same tidy front lawn. From the sidewalk, you could not tell them apart, and neither could anyone else. Call them the average and the ready. The average lives exactly at the middle of that line we drew. Looks completely fine, and by the country's standard is completely normal. Picture their account, a few $100s most of the time, a bit more right after payday. Sometimes zero right before it. No cushion behind it, and a couple of credit cards carrying a balance. The average isn't reckless, they're just living the way the math allows, spending what comes in exactly like most of the street. And for months, even years, nothing bad happens, and you'd never know anything was fragile. Picture a calm, ordinary surface with nothing at all underneath it. The ready looks identical from the outside, same house, same car, same lawn, but made one different choice. Picture a plain separate account off to the side that they fed a little at a time until it held 3 months of expenses, and then they left it alone, untouched, for one purpose only, the bad day. That is the entire difference between these 2 people. Not income, not a fancier life, one boring invisible account. Then the bad day comes the way it always eventually does, a hospital bill for a few $1,000s. Picture the exact same envelope landing in both mailboxes on the very same morning. For the average, that envelope is a catastrophe. Picture the credit card coming out, the balance jumping, the interest starting to pile up, a small emergency swelling into a debt that takes years to claw back. One bad day snowballing into a bad decade. For the ready, that same envelope is a bad afternoon. Picture them opening the separate account, paying the bill, feeling a flicker of stress, and walking away with their life fully intact. Same street, same salary, same emergency. One of them got knocked down for years, and the other barely broke stride. And the only thing that separated them was a plain account with a few months' expenses in it that nobody on the street could even see. So here's what to actually do with all of this. How to stop being the average and become the ready, starting from wherever you are tonight. The first move is the one this whole video was built to give you. Throw out the fake average, delete $62,000 from your head. It was never your benchmark. It was a ghost that only ever made you feel behind or falsely safe. The number that matters is not what a billionaire inflated average says the country has. It's whether you personally have a cushion between yourself and the next bad day. That's the only scoreboard. Picture crossing out that big fake number with a thick marker and writing a real one underneath it. Not a million, not 62,000, $1,000 to start. Because that's the second move. Build your first $1,000 and treat it as the single most important financial milestone you will ever hit, more than any investment, any raise, anything. $1,000 in a separate account is the line that moves you from the majority who'd go into debt over a car repair to the minority who wouldn't. Picture a jar and picture it filling. Not to 1,000,000, just to 1,000. And understand that the moment it's full, you have already stepped over more than half the country. Then keep going. 1 month of expenses, and then the real target, 3 months, set aside in a plain account you don't touch. The third move is to keep that money separate and boring, on purpose, not in your checking account where it blends into the everyday money and gets spent without a decision. A different account, out of sight, with one job only, emergencies. Picture 2 jars on a shelf, one for spending that you use all week, and one marked emergency that you do not dip into for anything but a genuine bad day. And the fourth move makes it effortless. Automate it so a small amount slides into that emergency jar every single payday before you ever see it. And the fund builds itself while you forget it's even happening. And here's the reframe to hold on to, because none of this is about depriving yourself to hit some number that impresses strangers. It's the opposite. The whole point of the cushion is peace. It's being the person who opens the scary envelope and feels a flicker of stress, instead of a wave of panic. You are not building it to look wealthy. Remember, almost everyone who looks wealthy is the average, one bill from real trouble. You're building the one thing most of them don't have, the thing that actually lets a person sleep at night, a solid floor under your feet. In a country where most people are treading water up to their necks, you are building yourself a step to stand on. That is not deprivation. That's the whole game. So let's go back, one last time, to that late night, and the phone in the dark, and the search bar, and the question, how much does the average American have in savings? And that glowing lying number, $62,410. You see it completely differently now. You can see the giant standing behind it, a mile tall, holding that balloon of a number up in the sky, where no real person lives. You can see the actual line of ordinary people stretched across the field, and the truly typical one standing in the middle with about $8,000. Reachable, spendable, and rougher than it sounds. You can see the majority who couldn't cover a surprise $1,000 bill, and the quarter with nothing at all, and you understand now that this is the real country. The one hiding behind the confident smiles and the nice cars on your own street. But you also see the thing almost no one else looking at that number ever sees. You see that because the bar is this low, it is genuinely completely winnable. You don't have to be the giant, you don't have to match a fantasy. You just have to be one of the few people on that whole field who built a small, boring cushion and can take a punch. And that is within reach, starting with a single $1,000, starting this month, starting from wherever your account sits tonight. So close the search bar. Stop asking how you measure up to a ghost, and ask the only question that was ever real: if a bad day landed on you tomorrow morning, could you take it standing up? Build the answer to that question, one plain account, one boring cushion, one step above the water. And you won't just feel less afraid of the number on the screen. You'll be one of the very few people in the entire country who no longer has any reason to type it into the dark at all.